2.
It is going well. It is going well.
All right, let's see. We still don't have audio. All right, again, 1 2 1 2.
Okay, here we go. That's echo.
You're watching live from San Andreas High School right here in our demonstration classroom. Welcome to the virtual classroom interview series, AgTech Around the World, where we interview via Zoom professionals and companies doing exciting things in the world of controlled environment agriculture from around the globe. So the goal of this series is to provide career and industry exposure for students who might not otherwise have access to these professionals, so we can foster learning, inspiration, and hope. Now, the pathway, advanced technology farming, gives students here at the school the opportunity to participate in the latest technological and commercial growing techniques used in controlled environment ag, CEA, around the world. So it's a uniquely designed reciprocal inclusion with special education and general education students to offer them hands-on approach where they gain real-world skills to apply their sciences, learn benefits of healthy eating, and run a student business integrated all within their core curriculum. Now, if you guys have ever wondered what it would be like to grow up in the Arctic Circle, Christian D'Antonio is the guy for us today. Christian is responsible for educational initiatives within the partner communities focusing on Arctic growing. He's an avid believer in statistical analysis and education as a primary building block to sustainability through social innovation.
All right, so let's give Christian a warm welcome. Applause, guys. Thank you. All right, Christian. Let's see. All right. Come on. All right, thank you for joining us, Christian.
I'm happy to. More than happy to.
All right. So, so again, the intro, guys. So, Christian is Christian. Tell me where are you from?
I'm from Toronto, Canada.
Canada. So Christian's from Canada, and he is, as it was said earlier in the video, he's an educator, or part of the lead education in department for the company that he's working with. And they are doing something kind of similar to what we're doing here, but up north where you have freezing cold weather. So Christian, he's going to talk a little bit about their program up there and some of the issues that they deal with over up north. And so he has a presentation for us. So let's give him our attention. And Christian, it's all yours now. Go ahead and share your screen, and
Okay.
you can present.
Just let me know when you see it. Good to go?
All right, good to go.
Awesome. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for having me in the classroom today. I'm extremely excited to talk to you a bit about what Green Iglu does, who we are, and also kind of expand a bit on what is going on in Northern Canada right now. And to kind of set some context for this presentation, right now it's pretty much considered a national crisis because of the hunger that's going up in Northern Canada. And so Green Iglu as an organization, we're one of a few that are trying to do something about it and really help that situation so people are not hungry no longer in Northern Canada. And I spoke to Chris about the situation in Southern California right now, and there's some very interesting overlaps, but at the same time, they can have very different causes for the reason of the food insecurity. But I will be digging into that today. Just real quick again about myself, my name's Christian D'Antonio. I've been a part of Green Iglu for 5 years now, right from the beginning when it was just an idea to having multiple implementations in Northern Canada and working towards not only a food secure Canada, but also a better educational system and an economy as well. So let's start off with the definition of food insecurity. Simply put, that is a state without being reliable access to sufficient quantity of nutritious, affordable food. A simpler definition that one might have is an individual who doesn't know when and where their next meal is coming from. There's a level of uncertainty to that beyond the food insecurity is extremely uncomfortable. Now, as I continue, actually, I forgot to mention, feel free to ask questions at any time. Chris, I would just ask for some help if anybody does have a question just to get my attention. But to kind of set the context in Canada about how serious food insecurity is within Northern Canada, we would look at Canada, and let's assume that there's 100 people in the country. About right now, 8 out of 100 people are food insecure. So let's look at Nunavut specifically, though. And Nunavut is our northernmost territory. It's the biggest landmass out of the territories as well. And if Nunavut were 100 people, 68 would be food insecure. So that's well over half the entire population, which is a serious challenge and issue for Canadians overall. And it's the reason why we decided to stay home with our initiative too, right? Because it's somewhere you can have a direct impact. But to see our own home have such a high level of food insecurity is a big concern for us. So let's look at why there's so much food insecurity in Northern Canada. When we look at their diet, it's pretty diverse and it looks familiar. But when you see where they get their food from, a lot of it is actually from hunting, seals, caribou, and whatnot. So on a weekly basis or more frequently than that, there are hunting trips where the community will go hunting for their food, for a lot of their meats in their diet. Of course, they have other parts of their diet like vegetables and fruits, and usually we get this from the grocery store. Now, the challenge when it comes to the produce within the community, among other types of food as well, even like ketchup, Coca-Cola, bottles of water, grapes, so on and so forth. One of the biggest challenges is the extremely high food prices. So these are some of the high food prices around some of the grocery stores in Northern Canada, as you can see. I remember going up to one of the stores and I saw 12 cans of Coke for $52. Wow. Obviously, Coke is not the biggest, best part of your diet, but it speaks to the overall pricing of food up there. So you need to have an extremely high income to be able to sustain not only yourself, but a family of people based on these food prices to ensure that your family is fed consistently on a daily basis and healthily as well. So the nutrition aspect is also a very big portion of that. So the food prices are extremely high. Beyond that as well, food spoilage is also a big concern. And I'm going to get into exactly why, but when you look at a lot of the fresh produce, whether that's fruits or vegetables, or even herbs, a lot of that does go bad very fast the moment it hits the shelves. And let me dig into why all this happens. So this might look familiar. It's a shipping crate, and this is the boat. Other than some communities that get flights, these boats are responsible for bringing everything up to the community, from supplies to vehicles like cars and ATVs to their food and their drinks. So these themselves are responsible for pretty much the entirety of their supplies, and also even like building products, right? If they're going to get a school or to build some new houses or whatnot, they show up on these boats. Now, the thing about these boats are that they're not necessarily the fastest transportation process, but also extremely expensive. So when we look at Canada as a whole, in terms of just land mass, it's immense. It's the second biggest piece of land as a country around the world, next to Russia. Not only that, but Nunavut, as one of the biggest parts of Canada, is also extremely huge. It goes all the way from right to about Northern Ontario. It doesn't touch Northern Ontario, but around the same height. And also, it goes well into the Arctic, into the uppermost parts of the world. And so the Arctic Circle cuts about halfway through the territory itself. So for boats to actually ship from, let's say, Quebec, Manitoba, and eventually see their way all the way up to Northern Canada takes a very, very long time, weeks. There are even moments where the water can freeze over and the boat gets stuck. So that can also delay timelines to ensuring people get their food. Not only that, but the boats themselves are expensive, right? You got to pay for the people in the boats, the fuel, whatnot, all the actual resources that go into the boat. And as a result, that cost gets added on to the price of food. And the reality here is that by the time it hits the shelves and by the time that the grocery stores or the locally owned grocery stores need to make money just to sustain as a business, it's an extremely high price that the Northern Canadians have to pay. Now, the alternative here, and obviously what we're getting to, is local food growth. And obviously, you'd think, why can't Nunavut just grow their own food? Well, when we look at the land of Nunavut, when we're talking about the types of fruits and vegetables that we're used to, anything from apples, tomatoes, to celery, the land up there simply can't sustain that kind of growing. The land is largely bedrock or permafrost. In the winter, the Arctic experiences 24-hour darkness. In the summer, it experiences 24-hour sunlight, which a lot might say is actually tougher than the darkness. And not only that, but it's extremely cold. Now, I'm not too good with my degrees Celsius to degrees Fahrenheit calculations, but let me say, I would say roughly in the winter, it's likely about -20 Fahrenheit, if I remember correctly, during the actual winter up in northern Canada. So it's extremely cold and thus can't sustain food life and food growth. That being said, there are a ton of different species of plants that can grow up in northern Canada, a lot of which are actually edible as well. But again, when we're talking about the vast amount of vegetables and produce that we want as people, that is simply just not available for growth. And, that's honestly not, the end of the challenges as well. When we actually went up to Nauyat, formerly Repulse Bay, in Nunavut, we actually interviewed the entire community there. And we found a few other challenges as well. About 77% of the actual community is unemployed, 4 in 5 are insecure, and about 1 in 40 students graduate every year from high school. So obviously food insecurity is the biggest challenge because it's food insecurity, but there are among others as well. So that's why us as an organization, Green Iglu, we attempt to create economic opportunities for the people in the actual community. Greenhouse infrastructure is what is used to produce and educational programming for the actual schools. Now, I know today we're focusing specifically on food insecurity, but if anybody ever wants to learn more about the other capacities in terms of how we help, I'm always open to a phone call. But let's focus on food insecurity today and what Green Iglu is doing about that specifically. And, the one thing to mention about Green Iglu is, talking to Chris, the models are really different in terms of how we approach food insecurity, but both equally valid. I understand that, Growing Hope, for example, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, is going for a more, mass production approach where you create as much food as you can in the facility. Whereas Nunavut is really a collection of remote communities. Usually you need a plane or a boat to get to the next community over rather than a car. There are really no roads community to community. So as such, we have smaller production facilities in a bunch of remote communities trying to feed each separately. Chris, did you have a question there? I see
No, I'll save my question for after.
Okay, for sure. So these are actually the greenhouses that we use. We got a really pretty picture of them. These ones are an RV at Nunavut. The community there wanted 2 greenhouses to sustain what is, I believe, the second biggest population in Nunavut. And as such, we got these 2 up and running right now in the Arctic. So just a quick look at them so you can get an idea what they look like. Now, really the whole point of the organization is like, if you've ever watched The Martian, for example, on Mars, Mark Watney creates a dome to help bring the needs within a small space to sustain plant life. More or less, obviously a much less extreme example, we're kind of doing the same thing. We're trying to bring those needs in a sustainable capacity to one place in a community so we can grow food. So we will look at the needs of the plant. We know this. We got water, we got nutrients from the soil, air like carbon dioxide and oxygen, the warmth from the sun, the light from the sun. All of that creates plants and eventually goes into growing food. Now, what the greenhouse provides is the sun, the warmth, the light. And so those are the first needs that are going to be covered by the greenhouse. And we'll get into what's actually inside the greenhouse later. And Chris, as I'm going through this, let me know if I'm doing okay for time or whatnot. I hope I don't run over too much.
No, you're doing just great, man. Still got a lot of time left, 25.
Very good point. Okay, so the question is about the shape of the greenhouse. So that's actually good timing too, because I was actually going to get into that because it's what is known as a geodesic shape. So the actual shape of the greenhouse has very specific purposes. The geodesic shape actually might look familiar. It kind of looks like an igloo, which kind of seems appropriate. But the cool thing about the actual shape is it's a very powerful structure. As you can see, it's kind of like in a semi-sphere shape, but made out of triangles that eventually create the overall shape. First things first, it's an extremely powerful shape. The geodesic structure itself allows over 8 feet of snow on top, winds over 180 kilometers from the side, so on and so forth. It could take a big beating. Now, the big purpose here is because when you're in an extreme weather environment, you don't want to build a structure and watch it disappear a year later because of a really harsh winter. So as such, the geodesic shape is very, very pivotal to ensuring that it is a sustainable solution, that the structure does not mean damage, but in place and running as normal. Beyond that as well, the igloo shape is actually a great shape for distributing light and heat evenly. as I'll show you in a video a bit later, you're going to see a reflective blanket at the back of the greenhouse, and the responsibility of that is to reflect light directly onto the plants. But the shape allows itself to have a fairly even distribution of light and heat, which allows for a more optimal growing environment. So very good question on that. Now, the rest of the greenhouse, we have polycarbonate glazing panels, which is really just a very tough plastic exterior. And the good part about that is it does a great job of turning light into heat. So when you look at sun entering the greenhouse, we usually see that it is about 30 degrees warmer outside than it is inside, as long as we have sunlight. Now, there are times when the greenhouse does get too hot, especially in the summer, and you're looking at 24-hour sunlight, no real cooling period. So the automatic vents are used. They actually use honey from bees that will automatically expand or contract based on the temperature within the greenhouse, and will open that vent as such or close it back up to make sure that the temperature is regulated and ensuring that the temperature is the optimal growing conditions. Now we have a solar powered air system as well. The north wall insulation really just helps protect from the cold ground. And again, all weather insulated foundation, temperature, and also protection for the greenhouse. So as you can see, it's really dedicated for an Arctic growing environment. It was actually originally created out of the States, developed there, but we've managed to adapt it to northern weather. Now, beyond that as well, it actually might give you a hint into where our team name came from. So we were originally called Growing North. And we originally, as you can see in the bottom right there, I got to update that. But we are now Green Iglu as of a couple months ago. And it really came from the community up north, because when we were talking to the people of the community, they started calling it their Green Iglu. You know, the igloo-shaped structure that builds the green plants inside. And as such, we took a lot of inspiration from that, and we decided to name our organization Green Iglu because we just thought it was a way better name that they came up with and way more appropriate as well. Now, the other big question I get about these these igloos or greenhouses is, they look like big structures. They are big. They're 42 feet in diameter, but it does seem like a lot of work to, bring it up north. Not only that, but build it, get it all ready to go and whatnot. The extremely cool thing about these is that they're fairly modular. So it's almost like they kind of assemble like Lego. The moment you get the supplies up there by shipping it up, you build the foundation as you see in front of you. Usually it's a gravel bed, sometimes a cement bed. Depending on the resources within the community. But then to actually assemble it, it may look a little choppy on your end, but if this is a timeline right now, or a speeded up timeline of the actual building the greenhouse, what you're seeing is a period of about 3 days, depending on weather, of the greenhouse actually being constructed from the foundation all the way till everything being assembled. So as you can see, they put up the frame, and now it's just a matter of assembling the actual polycarbonate glazing panels in place, making sure that the foundation itself is all tightened up as well. And you can see that it actually snowed a bit during the actual building. And you are done. Simple as that. So it's a very, very flexible and versatile structure to making sure that it can get from point A to point B, from point A to point B, which is very, very useful. Because if we're shipping a greenhouse in the beginning of the year, we want to get growing as soon as possible. And this allows us to finish up construction and assembly within the greenhouse within a week. And before you know it, we're growing. So as I mentioned, actually, so about the geodesic shape again, it's a very powerful structure. This slide is just repeating that. So when you do have the high winds and the large amount of snow, you're still growing on the inside as long as there's sunlight. But we do have artificial lighting solutions as well for those winter periods, and I'll be getting into that later. Now, first, let's take a quick look at the greenhouse. This is a very short video, and this is Ben. He's one of the co-founders of Green Iglu. He spends a lot of time in northern Canada. And you can see a quick snapshot of the beginning of one of our growing periods. So we just planted those plants inside the towers, and now we're waiting for their full growth so we can eventually harvest them and provide it to the community. Now, Ben's going to point to something in the back here. And as you can see, this is the reflective blanket I was talking about. So this reflective blanket is north-facing, and it does a great job of retrieving the sunlight and hitting the plants with it. Not only that, but there's actually a big pool of water right below the reflective blanket that takes in the light, and as such becomes very hot. And it also becomes a great resource not only for water within the greenhouse, but also temperature regulation to ensure that, as the nightfall comes in the months that it does, that the body of water is still warm, and it will continue to heat up the greenhouse throughout the night. So it's an extremely good structure for that. So, we covered the warmth, we covered the light, and the protection of those plants. So those are the needs that we've covered. Now we still got to take water. We still got to take care of the nutrients, the soil and whatnot, and bring the rest of the needs to the plants so they can be taken care of. And this comes within the form of hydroponics. So this probably looks familiar. Of course, they are a soilless solution. They can plant vertically, which is extremely important, and I'll get into that a bit as well. And it also recycles water, which again, for such a scarce resource, it's extremely important. Like from what we've seen, a lot of the houses in Nunavut, for example, they don't necessarily have piping leading water into their house. They have a water truck come by either on a daily basis, maybe a few days, once a week or a couple times a week. A water truck will actually come in, fill in a big tank of water within their house, and they'll have that for the next few days for their daily uses, anywhere from drinking to showering, for example. Now, the same thing goes for the greenhouse. We don't have any feet of water. We have to get a water truck in quite consistently to get water within the actual greenhouse. But that's the beauty of a recycled system, is that it has to happen much less regularly. It's much less expensive in that capacity, and you also have a lot more control over the conditions of the water. What's the pH? How much nutrient concentration do we have in the water, so on and so forth. So it makes it a very, very powerful tool for a northern growing situation. So here's Ben again. There's not too much action in this video, so hopefully it's not too choppy, or at least you can get the gist of what's going on. But these are the towers a bit more grown up in northern Canada. So, it's a pretty simple system where we have water. Oh, skipped ahead a bit there. My apologies. Let me skip again. Where we have water feeding in from the top, and it's leaking down into the vegetables. So we actually, from the big tank of water, we have pumping the water all throughout these pipes. And with the drip that we get here, it's enough to feed the plants with the nutrients that we have actually artificially concentrated within the water. Now, as you can see here, the actual tower is more or less a plastic exterior with a foam interior where the plants are growing out of. And we have a lot of plants again. So as Ben's about to point out, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 plants in a single tower. Now, because the greenhouse is 42 feet in diameter, it's extremely important that we get as much growth as possible, and as such, take advantage of as much space as possible for an entire community, right? We're working within a confined space. So being able to grow vertically is extremely valuable for us to be able to take as much advantage of the space as much as possible, and is extremely useful for us. So I might be repeating things here, but in terms of how the greenhouses work, this is more of a simplified version, but it's fairly simple. We get water that pumps from the tank, but here at the bottom, and it simply drizzles the water over the plants, as you can see through these holes that would be planted there. Very simple process, but it's a very brilliant process at the same time, because it's such a self-sustaining solution. Obviously, there's maintenance that is needed. For example, if there's algae buildup, that needs to be taken care of. But for the most part, it's very much a self-sustaining solution that not only we can, but the community can actively engage with, be a part of the planting process, whether that's the schools or the adults of the community, and really make it a community center more so than just a greenhouse. So, sorry, was there a question?
Yeah, I had a question, Christian. So in that last slide, I noticed the animation that you were showing us is a tower garden, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so are you guys using tower gardens up in your guys' the Green Igloos right now?
We aren't currently. I use this as an example just to kind of show a simple version of how the towers work, but we're not using a tower garden.
All right. Yeah, I just wanted to bring that up because I noticed that it was tower gardens, and so in the classroom we do use some tower gardens to grow.
Oh, very cool.
Vegetables hydroponically. So
awesome. No, that's awesome to hear. And no, they're a very powerful tool, and we certainly considered the use in this, and I think we actually will eventually one day. The reason why we opted against tower gardens is because we don't want a single water source within the actual tower garden, because then we are maintaining multiple tower gardens. We want kind of a single source of water that'll feed to all the towers, and that's the system we've gone with so far. But that being said, like every community wants different types of growing within their greenhouses. We actually have soil beds in some of the greenhouses, planting things like potatoes and radishes and carrots and whatnot. Tomatoes, some communities want tomatoes, so we actually got to put the towers horizontally and hang up the tomatoes as such. So we have different solutions based on the actual plants that they want. But no, I appreciate you bringing that up, Chris.
Yeah, definitely.
So now the biggest benefit here, of course, there's a couple benefits. First of all, having locally grown food is extremely important because the food is fresh. So when we provide it to the community, they get fresh food that they get to hold on to, refrigerated, whatnot, and prepare that as they need to and not worry about purchasing spoiled food. But of course, as well, we're cutting out the transportation process, and we get to cut food prices up to 40 to 70%. So that's extremely valuable. Obviously, it still might even be more expensive than you might see in a lot of places, down in California or in Toronto, for example. But it is a massive difference to the people out there that need to buy these foods. And of course, whatever you want, you name it, we can grow in the towers, or we have different solutions for towers. For each specific type of fruit or vegetable. So we're very open always to the community as well to see what they want to grow. And that's really one of our biggest questions. Because when we enter a community, we don't just start doing things. First of all, we get invited out, or we ask to be invited. And as long as we get the okay, then we go around and we perform what's called a needs assessment. And we talk not just to the community leaders, but to the community people and the community members themselves. And we get a feeling of their thoughts of what's currently going on in their community. From a food perspective, from an educational perspective, from an economic perspective, it's extremely important. One of the questions we also want would be, if you'd want a greenhouse, what would you want to see grown inside? So as such, for all the foods you see in front of you, we've developed solutions to be able to grow each. Now, when we're talking about how we actually get the food from point A to point B from there, we work, again, very closely with each community to ensure that it's done in a sustainable capacity. So when we're not there, there's no reliance on us in any way, whether that's physical, financial, so on and so forth. So this operation model is completely dependent on the community themselves. So from actual harvesting the plants, it goes to the co-op. And now the co-op is a locally owned grocery store by the community. So we provide directly to them as they have direct interest in what we're doing. And then from there, it gets sold in 3 different capacities. The markets, which really is we invite people into the greenhouse, and we hold what's more or less a farmer's market. We have a bunch of food, and then they can come in and purchase it, or we give it for free depending on the time of year. The hamlet, which is actually their local municipal government, they can directly take care of transactions, or grocery stores. And there's one bigger chain in northern Canada called the Northern Store, and they are throughout many northern communities, and they can work with us as well. So just kind of speak to how we actually move the food from point A to point B. And here's a couple of examples of the people we've worked with. That's Ben again. He's harvesting some of the foods, and he's providing it to the locals there. So it's some of our proudest moments when we get to see smiles on their faces and more or less provide food to them. And more or less the food that they want to see as well. And the funny part is they actually teach us some recipes too, which is really cool. And we get to have cookouts with them, and it's actually a ton of fun. And certainly some unique foods, some that I've never had before, but all amazingly delicious. So that is more or less the presentation. Just on the last point, this is a very important point I want to make about the greenhouses themselves, is when it comes to any sustainable initiative, one of the most important parts is certainly statistical tracking, but also understanding, are you making a difference? Now, it seems like a simple question, but it's extremely complicated in terms of how you track everything. So in terms of Green Iglu, if I want to use a specific example, we look at our copper selection, we look at our metric tracking, how much are we growing, how much of it is fresh, how much are we harvesting, how much is provided to the community, how much have we sold of how much we've grown. All important things to track. But also, you always need consistent feedback. Talk to the people of the community. What does this greenhouse mean to you at this point? Is it an eyesore, or do you find it valuable? Are you eating the food that's within the greenhouse? What do you think of the food that's within the greenhouse? Has this helped with the amount of food accessibility that you have had over a specific amount of time? So on and so forth. And being able to keep up shows that you're making a difference and shows that you're actually helping more than you are hurting, which is, a very difficult thing for a nonprofit to do, because with low visibility or not consistent engagement with each of the people you're working for, the maintenance and the actual contribution can go by the wayside. So anywhere, again, from the Green Iglu, from ensuring that the algae is kept to a minimum, to ensuring that the nutrients and the pH scales are on par and as where they should be, to ensuring that the temperature in the greenhouse is good. And then talking to the people is extremely important, and is personally the most important of this initiative to me. So, in terms of an overall model, again, to speak to the last point of here, again, sustainability is the most important part. And from here, it really comes down to the operations, the horticulture, and the business aspect of it, which is really what we work off of in terms of our entire model. So that does it for me. I'm guessing I might be a bit under time. I thought it'd go a bit longer. But I certainly hope all of you enjoyed what Green Iglu has to do for Northern Canada, and also kind of a better appreciation and understanding of what is going on in Northern Canada from a food insecurity perspective, and that is not at all a unique circumstance, but it's actually quite visible throughout the entire world and in places you might not expect. So again, thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. We appreciate it. So I wanted to touch on a couple points during your presentation. So you said that a lot of your guys's, say the vegetables gets transported through shipping containers on boats, correct?
Correct.
So do you have do you know how many miles, an estimate of distance that produce actually travels?
Oh, that's a tough question. Actually, I did. I can bring you back over to the roots over here. So as you can see here, that I don't actually have an exact distance, but let me put it this way. When you're talking about a trip from Western Quebec all the way to the northernmost part of Northwest Territories, then back inland, on a boat, that takes months. At the shortest weeks. So it's, I can't speak to an exact distance, but the actual time and traveling it takes is absolutely immense. And as you can see here, they're kind of going way around Canada, right? They're cutting all the way back to the north and coming back inland. These are the routes that are possible, and they're very specific, but they're very, almost what you would say inefficient in the capacity of just the big travel routes themselves. But it is the reality of what they have to do to transport food. And until local growth is a sustainable solution all throughout northern Canada, really is the best option until people do something about it.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, so I guess the reason why I wanted to bring that up and point it out is because so here in Southern California, a lot of our produce that we have travels roughly 1,500 miles. So a lot of lettuces that we get is coming 1,500 miles, and generally I think that takes 4 to 7 days of travel to get here. I just one angle or one perspective to take a look at is, that's almost a whole week's worth of time in which you're getting your lettuces that aren't as fresh as they could be. And so I know for down here, big benefits for having a controlled environment agriculture system like we do at San Andreas is, we can provide locally grown and very, very fresh produce, to the community or to say business partners. And so I know that's a huge selling point down here, is, local, and a lot of people down here are kind of on this new thing, locally kick, where, they know that it takes a long time for their lettuce to get to them. And so as a result, they are wanting to buy locally grown. They know, it's fresh. It's a lot more old, for example, it actually lasts longer. And so on our side of things, because of the fact that it actually lasts longer, I mean, there's actually a cost, because you're not going to have to buy it. You're going to have a prolonged use of it. So.
No, absolutely. No, 100% agree with that. There's always a cost benefit to anything you do, whether you want to prolong it, there's still something that else is going to come out of that. So, when it comes to Northern Canada itself, this has kind of been a practice for a very long time now, and this is as efficient as it's been made. So some communities do get flights, which, depending on the size of your community and even the landing pad that you have and whatnot, allow for that. But that being said, for most communities, they have to take the boat. And there are ways to try to extend the life of the vegetables. But at the end of the day, it's just not good enough for what's going on.
Gotcha. So with the Green Igloos, you guys are dropping them in the community itself. So, I mean, within, say, walking distance within the community, correct?
Yeah. So now yet, for example, which was our first implementation, I would say it probably takes about 15 minutes to walk end to end, the entire community. And then when you're looking past that, you got land for days. It doesn't end. So we plopped ours actually right in the middle of the community because we found a good piece of flat land that the community wanted it there. So it's very accessible to everyone. But not only that, but it's within the power grid, very resourceful area. Oh, good.
Oh, but yeah, I was just saying that, that's a huge benefit to the community up there. Now I know another aspect of that is the quality of life improvement, being able to have the produce and that produce so close to home is probably a huge quality of life improvement for them.
No, absolutely. And it's exciting too, right? It's something for the students to engage in. We've particularly focused on the youth because the large majority of people in these communities are youth. And as such, we try to engage them anyway, in any capacity. So from students actually having trips out to the greenhouse to me doing digital lessons to the communities that we have greenhouses in and understanding really what is in their community and how they can engage with it. is extremely exciting for them. So obviously from a food perspective is the most important thing, but also it's something to participate with. It's another thing to bring the community closer and actually be a part of. And like quite frequently, we would have a lot of people drop by the greenhouse every day, ask questions, even participate. We usually have a couple of really close helpers that just love to help within the greenhouse, and they've actually more or less kind of been trained on the greenhouse just by participating and helping out, and they are a regular part of daily operations, which was really cool for us to see, and see the people within the community actively engage and excited to be a part of it. So from a different capacities, we hope that it is something that each of the communities see as a good thing for themselves.
Awesome. That's fantastic. I think we'll do the Q&A, but I want to ask the classroom really quickly. Do you guys have any questions that you want to ask right now? No questions? David, do you have a question? All right, David.
Hello, I'm David Paniagua, and my question is, what kind of lights do the plants need in the igloos?
Good question. So when it comes to pretty much, I would say more than half the year, we're talking February, March to October, possibly push into November, but that's tough. You just need the sun. Now, the sun, because it has such a big presence throughout the summer months, more so than you'd say anywhere in I think California, I think the day's 8 to 8 usually, if I remember correctly. In Toronto, sunset can set at 10 p.m. in the summer, then set at 4 or 5 p.m. in the winter. But when you're looking at a 24-hour day, which is obviously a 24-hour day, the supplemental lighting is not very much so needed. And as such, we can reasonably rely on the sunlight to to provide enough light to all the plants within the greenhouse, especially with the reflective blanket helping to distribute that evenly to ensure that growth is consistent and the plants are healthy. Now, when we're looking at the winter months, that's the complete opposite. We're looking at 24-hour darkness. If we let the greenhouse sit by itself, in that time, nothing would grow. So you do need artificial lighting, and in fact, you need a lot. Usually we would have an artificial light for 6 towers on a horizontal basis, but we're looking to input a lot more than that. But there's various complications that come with artificial lighting, because when you look at things like power, for example, we usually can run off several different sources, sometimes diesel, sometimes more renewable energy, but the power needs to be there as well. And as you can imagine, for a 42-foot diameter dome, 300 growing towers, you're going to need a lot of lighting. And as such, it demands a lot of energy resources. That being said, we do use a lot of artificial lighting and plan to, in the upcoming winter, to use a lot of artificial lighting to grow a lot of food, but there's a substantial amount you need.
That's very similar, at least with the use of artificial lighting for what we're doing here. Because we're in a controlled environment agricultural building, we don't have any sunlight in here. Being in Southern California, the heat is a very, very large, is a huge issue. And so the fact that we can grow indoors helps, control heat, for example, and then in general too, just using artificial lighting like LEDs, is very, very cost effective, especially because in general, the cost of living down here can be so high. So.
No, yeah, absolutely. No, 100%. LED is actually what we roll with as well. Yeah, we've been experimenting with different sorts because this is the first time really we've ever tried, and I would say most people have tried to grow in the Arctic in the winter, at least in northern Canada. And as such, it's been a big experimentation period, but we've seen some good results so far and hoping to continue with more.
Awesome. All right, so then let's do the Q&A videos. Students have some videos, so Cheryl's going to go ahead and you could go ahead and unshare your screen, and then Cheryl's going to share her screen so you can see the videos.
Sounds good.
Hello, my name is Matthew. My question is, what do they do for bad crops?
Very good question. So bad crops are an inevitability when it comes to any kind of growing system. And it can come from a variety of reasons. Like I mentioned, light is evenly distributed, but if you get too much light on a specific plant, for example, that can be damaging if there's not enough water, too much water, so on and so forth. So bad crops always happen. And we have a specific place to create compost. So within the greenhouse itself, any bad crops do not go to waste. They immediately go to our soil beds in an attempt to actually provide more nutrition to those as well. So anything that's used within the greenhouse, especially for such a scarce resource area, is 100% reused for any plants that can actually use the bad crops. So good question, very good question.
So that's Matthew. So how a lot of times when we have produce that we maybe say is old or isn't up to standard for us to give to olive and citrus, you know, we have you put it in the composting bin, you know, that big wheel. So it's the same thing that they do, that they use it and then use it to create a nutrient rich additive to put to the soil so that you can grow plants.
Hi, my name is Ruben, and I am in San Andreas School. And my question is, how they getting water nutrient of the plants?
Another very good question. It's something we're always looking out for as well. So we do have a various amount of measures to actually deal with pests. Now, I haven't seen any pests actually so far, which has come to the surprise of all of us. It's not actually a big challenge we've had to deal with. And why so far? We're actually not too sure. It's something we're currently exploring, and we have all the safeguards in place in case that it does happen. But no, it hasn't been a challenge as of yet. But also a very good question. These are things you always have to stay on top of. Like I mentioned with the algae before, right? Like these greenhouses still do need a ton of maintenance, and it's all the little challenges that might come along the way that can cause a serious hindrance in the growing process that you got to look out for. So pests is something we thought about, and you know, the day that comes, which it will come, that we have to deal with it, we will be prepared for that.
So, okay, so I have a question about that. Do you guys get aphids? Because I know aphids are a thing down here, but I feel like because of the freezing cold, you wouldn't necessarily, you guys wouldn't have aphids, for example.
Not that I've seen. No, we're not. We're not using those.
Gotcha. Okay. It seems kind of like, you know, even though the cold has a lot of negatives, I guess a plus side is, you know, maybe your pest issue is a lot lower because of the cold, and then also, you know, like mold, for example, maybe, you know, you don't get as much of that.
Yeah, neither have been a challenge, and that's what we're suspecting as well. That being said, you'd still expect something, right? Because if the greenhouse on a daily basis throughout the summer months is 30 degrees Celsius or 92, I would think, Fahrenheit, then you'd eventually expect something to come about, right? So we haven't seen that as a big challenge yet. We've had various other challenges that would come with growing, but pests, for some reason, we're not like, I'm assuming the cold weather in the external environment has something to do with it, but that's something we're currently exploring and researching as well.
Oh, okay. All right. So let's see. What else do we got, Cheryl?
What is the easiest plant and the hardest plant to keep alive?
Another very good question. These are great questions. The easiest plant, I would say by far and away, is kale. Kale is extremely resilient to temperature differentials, is also a very high growth plant, and is really low maintenance. When it comes to the nutrients and water that you have to provide it, it's a powerful plant that remains very hardy and is extremely nutritious at the same time. And fortunately for us, what we've seen, that people up north actually love it. They often turn it into kale chips from the oven with some salt, and it's delicious. So kale by far has been, you know, one of our, you know, our best plants to grow with, especially in the Arctic, especially considering when you start looking at you know, September, October, if you don't have any artificial heating, the inside of the greenhouse will start to get colder for sure, right? We're talking maybe 15 to 10 degrees Celsius or 50 degrees Fahrenheit, I believe. And as such, the kale happens to be resilient to that weather. Now, the hardest, and I wouldn't necessarily say it's just the hardest overall, but I would say one of the most challenging ones in northern Canada are the tomatoes. With tomatoes, you need a lot of sunlight, and you need a very warm climate as well. Now, when we can still get them going, no problem at all, but they become a more difficult plant to work with because of the amount of space they need. Because either we're providing them we're providing them growing solutions that are where we actually make the vertical towers horizontal, or we use soil beds or whatnot. And not only that, but because the dome is just the shape, we have to build contraptions to allow the tomatoes to actually be standing up, or we'll use other solutions to help them stand up as well, like a pole down the dirt, and then we'll stick them to it, right? And overall, it's also the positioning within the greenhouse as well is tough, because you need the towers near the middle of the greenhouse just for spatial regions. And as such, the tomatoes can sometimes get pushed to the exterior or the outside areas of the inside of the greenhouse. And as such, it's tough to find the exact spot for the sunlight. But we found a good way, because during the summer months, if this is the greenhouse, this is the back, this is the front, and this is where the reflective blanket is, the sun's beaming right through, it's able to actually get enough sunlight to the tomatoes. But I wouldn't say it's the hardest plant to grow, but it comes with the most amount of workarounds, I would say, considering the conditions we're in.
Hello, my name is Sato. My question is, how do you deliver your vegetables to the community?
Great question, and that's part of the reason why we do this is that we don't have to. No, it's a very good question, and like delivering to the community, right, is obviously we have to deliver it to the people. And I did touch on this a bit, but I'll be happy to go over it again. So we're talking about delivering it to the people. They actually come to us during the farmers markets, or we bring it to the local government or local grocery stores to resell the vegetables. We're not there to make extra money, so we are still able to keep the prices very low when we resell the vegetables. But those are the three outlets that we do, and it comes with participation of the local community organizations and just awareness of us that allows us to sell everything that we grow. But good question, another very good question, which is inherent to our model as an organization. So it's a very good, important topic to touch on.
Hello, my name is Gustavo Estrada, and my question is, what struggles have you guys came across when growing plants in the freezing cold?
Very good question again. So I already touched on this a bit, and it does absolutely come to the artificial capacities that you need to grow in the freezing cold. Because as beneficial as the greenhouse is, when the sun starts going down, that's your main energy source leaving. And as such, you need to have artificial components to be able to take care of and pick up the rest. And there are months where we can't grow in the winter, at least not yet. But we are working towards ensuring that it is a full year growing cycle. But it's the energy necessities and it's the resources that you're working with that make it extremely difficult. And there are times where we can't run it full year round just because of the energy requirements as well. And at that point, it can get extremely expensive. So I'd actually say the energy sources makes it the biggest challenge for growing within the winter as of now. Renewable energy for all of our greenhouses is the eventual goal. And we have a couple of ideas from combined heat and power to Arctic turbines. And right now we're experimenting with what works best to ensure that we can get a renewable source to grow year round and ensure that energy never becomes a challenge again. But also a very good question.
I think there's a lot of similar challenges that have dealt with and that we are also dealing with. So it's interesting to kind of make that relation, even though, like I said, in a sense, we're in two completely different worlds.
Indeed. Like even from Toronto to Northern Canada, right? It's like it doesn't feel like Southern Canada, but it's still very much a Canadian community. But the way of living, like it would be anywhere else in the world, is very different in a lot of different capacities. But at the same time, it's like approaching anything as you would anywhere else. So I hear you on that point. Do I see another question here? If the community works in the igloos?
Yes.
So do you mean like do they work in the greenhouses?
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, gotcha. So it depends, right? So for the actual sustainable operations, RVET has, or will at least very soon have people working in the greenhouse on a sustainable and annual basis. Right now in RVET, we have one of our people up there is there the full summer. The purpose there is to train within the community, to run it throughout the summer, and to get that next step going, because RVET's actually a very new implementation. We implemented last October, left it for the winter, and we came back in the spring, and now we're getting things up and running. With Nayat, for example, it's a mix. So we've hired people within the community in the past to work within the greenhouse. We've worked within the greenhouse in the past as well. And the goal there is to get it up and running. And so now that does come to a challenge, right? Like when you talk about, working with a community up in Northern Canada, they can work for a whole summer, but then, what actually often happens is that, like, let's say like a whale is in town, and then the community goes and needs to go, hunt the whale, for example, for feeding the community or whatnot. And as such, that can actually become a priority over working with us, and then we got to pick up the pieces from there. But that being said, it hasn't really become a challenge at all yet. It's something that we're aware of and that we have people that can be there at any time. But it's for now yet, it's a mix of us and the people within the community. RVET, it's us currently, and very soon there will be a lot of people within the actual community working on that full time and year round.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think that's very important. All right, we have another video. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was saying 100%. I agree with you. It's extremely important that the people within the community are running the greenhouse.
Yeah, definitely. So we still have a couple other video questions. So,
hi, I'm Charles. How do you guys work with the sunlight schedule during the season?
Very good question again. So the sunlight, without the sun, we got nothing going on here. So working with the schedule is extremely important. Now, it's kind of interesting because in spring and fall, you kind of get more typical schedules with, the sunset, the sunrise at what would maybe seem like normal times for us. So like in August, September, it really starts setting at a reasonable hour and raising at a reasonable hour. You feel like you're at home. in the summer, because the temperature regulation is so versatile within the greenhouse, we're not too concerned about the scheduling there because the temperature is automatically and regularly regulated, for a bad way to put it. And as such, the actual condition of the plants isn't too much of a concern. In fact, we welcome as much light as we possibly can in the greenhouse to ensure that it's getting as much sunlight as possible. Now, again, there is such a thing as too much sunlight. So if anything, if we see any plants that are getting too much, maybe they start turning yellow or whatnot, or there's any challenge that come with the plants, we will cover them. It's a very simple measure that will take care of that. But it's really what it is, important about the daily engagement with the greenhouse, ensuring that you go through the checks that we have for every person running the greenhouse. You continually do day by day to ensure that everything looks good. And then once you're good there, then you're moving on. Now, again, from the winter, again, when it comes to the schedule, there really is no schedule. The sun's non-existent in the specific months during the winter. And as such, it's entirely up to us to manage the artificial lighting within the greenhouse. And that takes much more work than it does in the summer. But, if it's a sustainable solution, then we're going to do it.
So, of course, I have no foreknowledge of the infrastructure up there. So when you guys are having to power the igloos, are you guys, so you said diesel, so are you guys using like a diesel generator that's directly hooked up? Or is there actually electrical infrastructure built into the ground that's kind of connecting all the houses in that area?
So very good question. For what we use electrical infrastructure. So they're all diesel generators, for example, powering the whole community, but we don't have a generator right beside the greenhouse. We plug right into the grid.
Okay.
And that allows us to get the power for the greenhouse. But like I said, sustainable energy is going to be one of the biggest priorities going forward because we can't rely on that forever. And a whole part of our model is to ensure that we are a sustainable organization in every capacity, energy included. So obviously energy, is not the easiest subject, but we're very close to working with that. And hopefully this winter we'll have something going on for a sustainable solution.
Okay, great. Thank you.
No problem.
All right, I think we still have a few more video questions, and then we will wrap it up.
Sounds good.
So just to check, we're running a little behind. You're okay with that?
100%.
Late, I mean. Okay, great.
No rush.
Hi, my name is Gigi. What kind of vegetables did you guys grow?
So we, again, it's entirely dependent on what the community wants. So as you saw in the towers, we primarily have greens like lettuce, kale, so on and so forth. We also get a lot of herbs going, anywhere from thyme to oregano, basil, so on and so forth. Really easy to grow herbs and plants so we can have abundance. Now on the edges of the greenhouse or throughout other towers as well, we got radishes going. We got carrots, potatoes, tomatoes. This year I know we're experimenting with a lot more, and we're going to start doing fruits as well. And fruits is going to be a big thing for us going forward. Now that we've been running greenhouses for a few years now, we're going to be introducing fruits in a very big capacity and growing all sorts. Obviously things like apples wouldn't necessarily be possible because it's a tree, but when you can do things like strawberries and whatnot, that's going to be, a big priority for us going forward.
Hi, my name is Swan. How do you keep the plants from freezing?
Another great question. During the summer, actually, it's definitely above freezing. So from the summer, there's no worries ever at all about that. From the spring and fall, the sunlight is still more than enough to keep the plants from freezing. And again, throughout the evenings as well, the body of water and the other temperature regulation measures we have keep it from freezing. It would freeze in the winter. It wouldn't even grow in the winter if we didn't have. So again, artificial heating, artificial lighting all the way.
Oh, okay. So that would be it for the video question section.
Okay.
So Cheryl, do you want to give any feedback?
Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us. I think one of the highlights of the presentation was showing the real challenges that you guys are facing and growing up there with the weather conditions. I think it's crazy how far and how long food has to travel and the time that it takes to get to the destination. I would be thinking myself, how am I going to eat if I'm out there? So I think what you guys are doing is really, really important, and I'm sure the community gets to try different foods and vegetables that they typically wouldn't have the opportunity to have as much access to that you guys are giving them.
what else? I thought it was really interesting how you guys used the north wall blanket to not only warm the plants, but also use it as a source for your water and keep making it more sustainable. Was there any other highlights that you guys thought was really cool? Go ahead, Gigi. Yes. Here, I'm gonna put my. What did you like about the presentation? Let me say it.
I like it because I like it that has like lots of vegetables and lots of tomato and grapes and asparagus.
Thanks, Gigi. I'm glad you all enjoyed the presentation. Really, that makes me very happy.
What I liked about your presentation is how you explain everything, like how you do it and how everything works.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, let's give Christian a round of applause. And so, again, Christian, we really appreciate you, giving us your time here for to do this presentation and to, talk to the students about the program that you guys have and give them some perspective, from industry professionals that are doing something similar to what we're doing. So there's, so they can get a better understanding of that. So again, thank you very much. And then I'll touch bases with you after the presentation. And yeah, that would be about it. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much again for having me. Much appreciated. I'm always very excited to talk about the topic, especially with people in places that I wasn't even aware of going through the same thing. And so, it's awesome to be able to relate, but talk about, the different situations as well. So thank you again so much. Much appreciated. And if there are any other follow-up questions that ever come up, please feel free to send them my way and happy to answer.
Awesome. Will do. All right, great.
Thank you.
Thank you.